whatever, and
All right, I guess we better get started.
run into all kinds of people you don't usually see.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's still a lot of Bear fans listening.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm enjoying this Sunday school so much. They say the teacher always learns the most, and I'm just really having fun with this. So you might recall last week we finished with the story about Paul in Ephesus, and they had the big riot. Remember, we showed you the pictures of the temple. I passed around the picture of the theater where they all rioted. So we're picking up now in chapter 20. I originally thought we'd get through all of chapter 20 today.
There you go, thinking.
Yeah. So we'll just see how far we go. But one of the things I want you to notice as we're going through it, it's going to be very easy for you to get lost now with all the names of people and names of places. And I'm going to have you try to follow on your maps the best you can. You get more out of it if you can actually put this together, but don't stress over that. I think a big takeaway for you is to realize that look at in just a few short years how the church has spread. That now every place they visit, every place they go, they're staying with the brothers and sisters that are there, because there's Christians now in every town just about. So we're seeing, as we hear the story, the backdrop that we're seeing is that the church is expanding and the work of God is happening and going forth in powerful and wonderful ways. So let's pick up at chapter 20, verse 1. So after the uproar ceased, the uproar is the riot that we talked about last week. After the uproar ceased, Paul sent for the disciples, and after encouraging them, he said farewell and departed for Macedonia. Okay, before we go any further, let's take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 16. I'll have you look up 1 Corinthians chapter 16. So Paul wrote, we think, 1 Corinthians while he was there in Ephesus. And quite probably he sent Timothy to deliver the letter to the Corinthians while he's there at Ephesus. So in chapter 16, look starting at verse 5. I will visit you after passing through Macedonia, for I intend to pass through Macedonia, and perhaps I will stay with you, or even spend the winter, so that you may help me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not want to see you just in passing. I hope to spend some time with you if the Lord permits. But I will stay in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a wide door for effective work is open to me, and there are many adversaries. When Timothy comes, see that you put him at ease. So whenever Paul wrote this letter, he's writing it from Ephesus, and he's sending it apparently through Timothy. And what's his plan? What's he telling the Corinthians he wants to do? He wants to go through Macedonia. So here's Ephesus, or maybe you should find it on your little map. Can you find it on your little map, Ephesus? Kind of right upper center is the region of Asia. It's in yellow. And Ephesus is in the lower left middle of that yellow. Do you see it there, Ephesus? Okay. So that's where he is. And where he wants to go, look way up in the upper left of your map in orange. That's Macedonia. And he was there in the second missionary journey. Remember, it's where he founded churches at Philippi and Thessalonica and Berea. That's where he wants to go. And then he's saying, from there, I want to go down to visit you, Corinthians. Whereas Corinth is down in like that bluish green, Achaia, that's Greece. You see Corinth down there? So that's his plan. But he wants to wait until Pentecost. Well, now, I don't know how closely we can time this. Pentecost, and that would have been the year 55 AD. Pentecost would have been May 25th. So did he wait that long? I don't know if anyone's sure about that, but that's his plan. That's what he wants to do. So now he finally leaves Ephesus, and how long had he been at Ephesus? Does anyone remember?
A year and a half.
Wasn't it 3 years? I think it was 3 years, right? He'd been there a long time.
Pentecost he's celebrating is the Jewish Pentecost?
Yes, yes. Okay, so let's go to verse 2, chapter 20, verse 2, in Acts. When he had gone through those regions and had given them much encouragement, he came to Greece. So if you're following on your map, the little red line going from Ephesus up to Troas, that's where he'd catch a boat, over to all the orange area, Macedonia, that's all being described in this one verse. One verse is telling us all that. So we're not getting any details about that. It's quite possible that that time frame that's being described in this one verse is actually about a whole year. So this could be taking us from 55 AD into 56 AD. In the beginning of verse 3, there he spent 3 months. So he spends 3 months down in Greece, and so that's taking us through the winter into 57 AD. So there's a lot compressed in there that we're not hearing all the details about that. Let's look at a couple other passages again in 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 7. Second Corinthians 7, starting at verse 5. For even when we came into Macedonia, our bodies had no rest, but we were afflicted at every turn, fighting without and fear within. Verse 6. But God, who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus, and not only by his coming, but also by the comfort with which he was comforted by you, as he told us of your longing, your mourning, your zeal for me, so that I rejoice still more. So in other words, Paul, when he was at Ephesus, sent the letter that we know of now as 1 Corinthians with Timothy to bring it to Ephesus. Then, later, he sends Titus to go find out, did it make any difference? Did the ministry of Timothy, did my letter that I sent them? Remember, if you've ever read 1 Corinthians, what do you notice about it? What was characteristic of the church at Corinth? They had a lot of problems. a lot of things, bad things going on. So that's what Paul's addressing in 1 Corinthians 1. You got to do this problem, you got this. He's so eager to find out, is it working? Did anything happen? And he doesn't get word. And finally, Titus comes, and they meet up somewhere there in Macedonia, and Titus now is able to say, yes, your letter, God used the letter, it worked. The Corinthians changed, and they redid things based on what you said. And you can see how Paul's heart is getting encouraged. And quite probably then, that's when he writes 2 Corinthians, and it's Titus then that's going back to Corinth, delivering this second letter here. So that's all possibly happening right in this time frame here. So a lot
question
in there.
You said that, like in that one verse, I forget which one, that it took place in like about a year.
Yeah.
The travels did. Okay, so if he's waiting for word, letters didn't travel any faster than people traveling back then. There was no airmail, so the letter would take months and months to get delivered, also, right? So that's why it took them a while to find out if.
I don't know if we know. Actually, the mail system was quite remarkable back then. It's not like today.
It was like the Pony Express.
But in the Roman Empire, mail moved fairly quickly.
Really?
So I didn't dig into all the details of it. Different scholars have reconstructed it different ways, that he sent Titus, and then Titus was supposed to meet him at Troas, and Titus didn't show up at Troas, and that's why he took the boat and went ahead to Macedonia. So they might have missed, they're missing each other. Titus was delayed somehow. I guess we don't know all the details of that. But you can see the larger picture, that that Paul's concerned about the churches, and he's worried about what's going on there. So chapter 20, verse 3, there he spent 3 months. So finally he gets to Greece, and he spends about 3 months with them. Probably a good part of that at Corinth, but maybe other churches in Greece as well. And then look at the second half of verse 3. And when a plot was made against him by the Jews as he was about to set sail for Syria, he decided to return through Macedonia. All right, so he wanted to sail from that green section there where you see Corinth. He wanted to go from there to Syria. Syria, where's Syria? Back where Antioch is. He's trying to get back home because he wants to go to Jerusalem. And they discovered that some of the Jews have made a plot against him. So he changes his mind. Why would you change your mind about getting on this boat?
Well,
So yeah, it's a lot easier for somebody to kill you if you're on a little boat sailing. So he's going to go back overland to Macedonia and go a different way. Okay, now pick up at verse 4. Sopater, the Berean, son of Pyrrhus, accompanied him, and of the Thessalonians Aristarchus and Secundus, and Gaius of Derbe and Timothy, and of the Asians Tychicus and Trophimus. These went on ahead and were waiting for us at Troas. All right, so he decides to, see on the red lines there, your red lines go from Corinth, now they start going backwards up into Macedonia. We discover that he's got these companions with him at Macedonia. And Luke tells us where all these guys are from. So it makes a lot of sense. We know from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, he was sending letters to the churches saying, make a collection, collect money to give to the church back in Jerusalem because of the great famine that had happened. The church at Jerusalem kind of had a primacy. They were important, and yet they were suffering. So Paul's concern was that we should help them. So these could very well be the representatives of these different churches bringing kind of the money from their church, going along with Paul. So you've got one fellow from Berea. You remember where Berea was? That was up in Macedonia. And remember, the Bereans were more noble than anyone else because when Paul preached to them, it said they studied carefully the scriptures to see if what he said was correct. So we know there's a church there, and someone from Berea is going with them. There's two people here coming from Thessalonica, representing that church. And then there's Gaius and Timothy. This is not the same Gaius that we read about in the last chapter from Ephesus. So this is a Gaius from Derbe, and that's where Timothy was from, right? So they've come all this way with him, but they probably have collections from their churches. And then these two fellows, Tychicus and Trophimus, we won't look up all the scriptures where they're mentioned. They're mentioned in other places in the New Testament, but it's quite obvious that they are from Ephesus. He calls them the Asians. But this whole province of Asia, where they're from in particular, is Ephesus. So Paul's got this entourage. They go with him back to Macedonia, and then they go on to Troas. So you see they have to cross the water, but that's a short boat ride to Troas. So that's they're on the Asian continent here. Troas is Troy, by the way. So you've heard about the Trojan War. Mm-hmm. This is where Troy would have been most likely. And you notice something else when you read verse 5. These, meaning these 7 people that he's just mentioned. Oh, before I even go further than that, 7 people going with him that are mentioned by name. Where else do you remember 7 people in the book of Acts? The 7 deacons. Remember the 7 deacons? So I don't want to make too much of this. You'd never, make this a doctrine and form a church on it. It's just trying to understand what's going on here. But you have Paul, and now just like the early church, Peter said, we can't serve the tables anymore. We need someone else to do. So they picked 7 deacons. Now Paul has 7 guys going with him. It's kind of like the Lord of the Rings, right? They picked all the people that are going to go with them for this journey. And it just happens to be the same number that they had of the deacons. And where are they going, by the way, ultimately? They want to go to Jerusalem, right? So it's this long journey and voyage to Jerusalem, fraught with danger. We'll see more of that when we get to chapter 21, too. But what does that make you think of? Who was on a journey to Jerusalem that was fraught with danger? Jesus, right. So all the things you're seeing here now as we read the story of Paul, what they're doing is Luke is building Paul up, right? He's trying to let us know, and I know I've told you this before, the first part of the book of Acts was mostly about who was the big shot there? Peter. But now who's the big shot, so to speak? It's Paul. So it's Luke's way of trying to say, just as Christ called Peter, Christ has called Paul to be an apostle to the Gentiles and is using him in great and mighty ways. So you keep seeing these repetitions of things happening with Paul that are letting you know, hinting at the fact of how important a figure he is, what a big deal he is. And something else to notice then in verse 5. So these went on ahead. That's these 7. They went on ahead to Troas, and we're waiting for us at Troas. Uh-oh. So who's with Paul now? Luke. They're waiting for us.
Yeah.
Luke's saying, I was with them there while we were traveling from Macedonia to Troas, and these 7 went ahead and were waiting for us. Verse 6, but we, so that's Paul and Luke, sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread they celebrated in Philippi, and in 5 days we came to them at Troas. That's interesting because in the last missionary journey, when they traveled from Troas to Philippi, it only took them 3 days. Now coming back, it takes them 5 days. Why?
They got sailboats.
Because it's in the springtime, right? They're in sailboats.
Yeah.
And so that's when the wind is coming. The wind is coming in the spring this way. So that's one of the ways we can help, with timing this and putting it all together. You just can see how you're creating a story by all the clues that Luke is giving us. So they're going against the wind to get down there. It takes them 2 days longer. And then they stay in Troas for 7 days. Why would they stay in Troas 7 days? Well, first of all, we're going to discover there's already a church at Troas. So we haven't seen how that church developed. But like I said earlier, churches now are springing up all over the place. The work of the gospel. So there's a church there at Troas, and they stay 7 days. Why 7 days? So that they can get to the day of worship again. They're staying long enough to come to church. Or the way we'd say it today, right? So look at verse 7. On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day. So this is their day of church. Now, what day are they having church on? First day of the week, Sunday. Right. So you can already see that the transition is taking place. What would be the Jewish day of worship normally?
Saturday.
Sabbath, right. But already Christians are starting to meet together to break bread on Sunday. So they're breaking bread. Now this could just mean that they're having a meal together, but it looks very much like they're celebrating the Lord's Supper together. Because not only are they getting together and sharing this, but Paul is giving the sermon. So this is not just an ordinary, let's get together and grill a few hot dogs. They're getting together to hear the word being proclaimed. So in all likelihood, they're having the Lord's Supper too. And look at the end of verse 7 then. So Paul talks to them, and he prolonged his speech until Midnight.
Wow.
Yes. I don't want to hear any complaints about how long my sermons are. He speaks till midnight. In verse 8, there were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered. So Luke lets us know again, he was there. And verse 9, and a young man named Eutychus sitting in the window. So the room, you can imagine this. They're up on the 3rd floor. There's all kinds of torches. It's hot up there. And Paul's sermon is going on until midnight. And this is another side note. We could look this up. When Paul writes his letter to the Corinthians, he writes, I did not come to you with mighty speech, but proclaiming Christ crucified. And there are some people that believe that although the content of Paul's sermons and the content of Paul's speeches were profoundly deep, that his delivery was not especially powerful. So Paul may have been one of those preachers, that spoke, the kind we all hate to listen to, but many of them, they're very, very profound. So that's why it's not how excitable the pastor gets up there, how many jokes he tells. It's the content of what he's saying. So Paul's preaching until midnight, and we might say it's starting to look a little boring. So finally this man Eutychus then, who's been sitting up in the windowsill, falls asleep. And being overcome by sleep, he fell down from the 3rd story and was taken up dead. Verse 10, but Paul went down and bent over him. Very literally, it's Paul fell upon him. So you get from, if you think bent over him, that you kind of picture Eutychus lying there dead, and Paul's kind of going, right? Fell upon him. What would you picture with that?
Lay down. Like
Lay down, right. What does that make you think of?
Jesus doing, what was it, Lazarus?
No, you're on the right track. Not Jesus. Elijah. Remember when the child died of the widow?
Yes.
And Elijah laid on top of him. And then Elisha does the same thing. So by Elisha doing the same thing when another boy dies later on, what does that tell you? What's the Bible trying to tell us about Elisha? That Elisha was a great prophet just like Elijah. And now here, what's it trying to tell us about Paul? That Paul is a great man of God, like Elijah and Elisha. So you see how it's all the little hints are to build up who he is. So he falls upon him, takes him in his arms, and he says, do not be alarmed, for his life is in him. Wow. So this little boy, or we don't know, lad, however old he is, but he's returned from life. We won't do it now, but that's a good trivia question. Can you name all the people in the Bible who were dead and came back to life again? I think there are 7, but that's a good, you can talk about it in the car on the way home.
And I don't get the next verse at all.
Verse 11, and when
No, I
Paul
meant
had gone
12.
up and had broken bread and eaten, so it's after midnight, and Paul has been preaching till then. So now this boy's back alive, but what's the time to do?
Eat.
Not eat dinner, it's after midnight. The Lord's
Midnight
Supper.
snack.
Yeah, we didn't have the Lord's Supper yet. This is an all-night-long church service. Now it's time for the Lord's Supper. And then it says, you see there where it says he conversed with them a long while until daybreak? So even there, the word converse, the Greek is homilesas. It's where we get another English
Homily.
word.
Homily.
Homily. Yeah, what's a homily?
It's a sermon in the
Sermon.
Catholic Church.
Yes. So, again, I don't want to be too dogmatic about this, but it sounds like he preaches till midnight, raises Eutychus from the dead, goes up, has the Lord's Supper, and then keeps preaching until the sunup.
At Sunday school.
Yeah, it's for Sunday school. That's the impression you get from what that night was like there. So it's what an amazing thing. Verse 12, and they took the youth away alive, and we're not a little comforted.
I don't get that. They were not a little comforted.
That's like Yoda speak, right? It means they were
Yeah,
not, it means
they weren't little, they were a lot.
they were a lot comforted.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were really happy that their friend Eutychus didn't stay
Okay.
dead. Eutychus is alive. Okay, now I'm down
That
to,
is a funny way to put it, though.
Yeah.
it is, it's a funny way to talk. Do I want to go further? Because I only have 2 or 3 minutes.
Go for it. We got till midnight.
Good one.
Oh. All right, we'll do a couple verses, I guess. All right, but going ahead to the ship. So you see from where they are at Troas, you see on your map, they're going to now, in the morning after that night-long church service, get on the ship, and we set sail for Assos. You see where that is? It's very short distance. It's not very far. Intending to take Paul aboard there, for so he had arranged, intending himself to go by land. And when he met us at Assos, we took him on board and went to Mytilene. So here's what's going on. Paul is traveling that distance. You see it there from Troas to Assos. That's about 30 miles. And he decides to walk in the morning. All these other disciples, including Luke, how do they get there from Troas to Assos? They take a boat. Right, they set sail. So if you look at your map, you can see going by land is a shortcut. It cuts across. Going by sea, of course, traveling by sea is nice. You don't wear your legs out. You know, you're sitting in the water. But you see, it's a lot longer because they kind of have to go around the long way. So why we don't know. I don't know if we know the answer to this, but why do you think Paul would want to walk while all of his friends
In order to keep
take a
himself
boat?
awake after preaching all night.
Say it again.
It's the only way he can keep himself awake.
Oh, to keep awake? Well, he could have slept on the ship.
Well, and the rest of them took the boat because then they could sleep on the.
Yeah. I don't know if we know. He doesn't say. But you can remember too, who else used to kind of send the disciples out on a boat while he.
Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. So they end up going to Assos, and that's where they meet. Verse 14, and when he met us at Assos, we took him on board. So the boat stops in Assos, Paul gets on, and then they take it down to Mytilene, which is the capital of the island of Lesbos. Verse 15, and sailing from there, we came the following day opposite Chios. So you see on your little map, see where it goes down to there? And the next day we touched at Samos. And the day after that we went to Miletus. So you can see about how far the boat's going every day. Each day it sails, and then they don't probably want to sail at night, so they're finding a port, pulling in there, and staying for the night. Now, why did they go all the way down to Miletus? Look at the city that's just a little bit north of Miletus.
Samples.
Ephesus. Right. So in verse 16 of our text, Paul had decided to sail past Ephesus so that he might not have to spend time in Asia, for he was hastening to be at Jerusalem, if possible, on the day of Pentecost. So he's staying on this boat, even though it's bypassing Ephesus. I'm sure he could have taken another boat that would have gone to Ephesus, but he's on this boat because this is the one that's going to get him the fastest back to Syria, so he can get down to Jerusalem, where he wants to be by Pentecost, which is the following spring, right? So he spent 3 years in Ephesus. He's got good friends there, people he loves there, but he passes up a chance to stop there and go there, because what's really important to him is he's got to get to Jerusalem. But he still arranges to meet some of the folks from Ephesus. So look at verse 17 and 18, and we'll wrap it up there. Now from Miletus, he sent to Ephesus. So that little, you see that little gap on your map from Miletus to Ephesus? Do you see that? That's about 30 miles. So that's just about 1 day's walk if you're walking really fast. So he sends word up to Ephesus, and he calls the elders of the church to come to him. So they travel by land the 30 miles down to Miletus. So it's not the whole church, it's just the elders. Now who are the elders? The presbyters is where we get our English word from, presbyteroi. Who are the pastors? Those are the pastors, right? In the New Testament, elders, pastors, and bishops or overseers are different titles or names for the same office, which is pastor. So he's contacted all the pastors in Ephesus so they would come down, and so this is a pastors' convention they're having now at Miletus, and then he's going to make an address to them. We're going to stop right there, but next week we'll look at that. Paul, this is the only address that we have of Paul to believers. We have his speeches to non-believers, but this is his speech to believers. So I think you'll enjoy looking at what he has to say to them next week. Thank you so much for being here. God's grace and peace go with you.
All right, off to work.